discretion advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
On New Year's Day, 1981, Minnesota police received a strange call at 3 a.m. A male caller with an unsettling high-pitched voice simply gave them directions to a location, telling them that if they went there, they would find a girl who had been hurt. Sure enough, at the location in St. Paul, 20-year-old Karen Potak was lying naked in the snow. Her injuries were so severe that, at first, the responding officers thought that she was dead, and one of them later described the moment as the most devastating scene he'd seen in his career. However, even though Karen had been beaten so violently that parts of her brain had been exposed, she was miraculously still alive. She survived medical treatment, but was left with a brain injury and memory loss from the attack. The police had no way of tracking down the strange, tearful man who had called them about Karen's attack. He hadn't been on the phone long enough to trace the call, and there were no eyewitnesses who could provide additional information. With no clues as to the attacker's identity, and Karen unable to identify her assailant, the case went cold, until the caller contacted police a second time. On the 3rd of June, 1981, 18-year-old Kimberly Compton left her home in the state of Wisconsin to move to Twin Cities, Minnesota. She'd just graduated high school and she wanted to look for a job in that area, but she didn't get a chance. The same day that she arrived in Minnesota, Kimberly was brutally murdered, and her body was discovered lying in a field. First responders were astonished by the brutality of the crime. Kimberly's killer had used an ice pick to stab her more than 60 times. Less than 2 days later, a call came through to the police station. The male caller spoke in a weepy, high-pitched voice and confessed that he was the one who had murdered Kimberly. Because of his strange voice and the fact that the crime was all over the news, the operators originally thought it was a prank, until the man revealed a detail that only law enforcement and the killer were aware of. Quote, "Please find me," he begged. "I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing everybody. I don't know why I had to stab her. I'm so upset about it." Although the media knew several other details about Kimberly's death, the police never mentioned the murder weapon, the ice pick, and once the caller mentioned the ice pick, the chances that this was a prank call became much smaller. But despite expressing remorse for the crime, the caller never gave his name or agreed to turn himself in. After hanging up, he called back a second time saying, "I'll try not to kill anyone else." During the second call, he was on the line long enough for the police to trace this call. But when the officers arrived at the phone booth that the call was traced to, the killer was nowhere to be seen. Now convinced that they had received direct contact from Kimberly's killer, the police decided to compare the caller's unusual voice to recordings from other recent 911 calls. That's how they discovered a connection to an early anonymous tip and realized that on New Year's Day that same year, Karen Potak had been lucky enough to survive an attack from the same man who had stabbed Kimberly Compton 61 times. The breakthrough in the case didn't last. Kimberly had died from her wounds, and Karen didn't remember being attacked. There were no clues as to the killer's identity, and all the investigators could do was wait to see if he called again. And almost an entire year later, he did. On the 8th of August, 1982, a call came through from the man who had now been nicknamed the Weepy-voiced killer. "Please don't talk," he begged the operator. "Listen, I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over in St. Paul." The police were able to connect the killer's confession to a body with more than 100 stab wounds that had been discovered lying by the Mississippi River only 2 days before. The victim was later identified as Barbara Simmons, a nurse in her 40s. This time, there was a key difference in the investigation. the police had a witness who might have seen Barbara's killer. The night before Barbara was killed, she had been out drinking at a Minneapolis bar with some friends. She had decided to leave the bar with a man she'd never met before, saying, "He's cute. I hope he's nice because I just need a ride home." She was never seen alive again. But for the first time, the weepy-voiced killer had been seen by an eyewitness. On the 21st of August, 1982, a teenage sex worker got into a man's car. As time went by, Denise Williams had a terrible gut feeling. The guy behind the wheel had told her that he would drop her off in the city afterwards, but instead, he started taking winding roads through a dimly lit area. Finally, he stopped the car. He pulled out a screwdriver, which he used to stab her 15 times. Denise fought back and was able to grab onto a glass bottle, which she used to hit her attacker in the face and head while screaming. The bottle drew blood, and Denise's screaming attracted the attention of a man who lived in the neighborhood. The man tried to fight off Denise's attacker, who then fled back to his apartment. However, the wounds from the glass bottle were deep, and the weepy-voiced killer quickly realized that he needed medical attention. But he'd forgotten one thing. He had an incredibly distinctive voice that police would instantly recognize, and law enforcement across Minneapolis were looking for a man who had recently been hit in the face with a bottle. By calling for help, the killer essentially turned himself in, revealing that he was a local man by the name of Paul Michael Stefani. Paul had lived in the area in the 60s, and he'd been the youngest of 10 siblings raised by Catholic parents. When Paul was a toddler, his mother had remarried, and her new husband physically abused the children, even occasionally throwing one of them down a flight of stairs. From then on, Paul's life had taken an increasingly dark path. In his adult years, Paul continued to be a practicing Catholic, just like his parents. But despite his devotion, something inside Paul's head just didn't align with what he was doing at church. He later claimed that he heard voices in his head, telling him, "Paul, it's time to kill." At the same time, when he started killing, he knew that he was betraying his religion. During one of his calls to the police, through his tears, he told the operator, "I will never make it to heaven." At Paul's trial for Barbara Simmons' murder, several of his loved ones testified against him. His sister, a housemate, and his own ex-wife all told the court that they had listened to the recordings of the weepy-voiced killer's phone calls, and they believed that it was Paul. However, because Paul was crying hysterically in all of his telephone calls with the police, his voice was unable to be confidently identified. This meant that even though he was charged with murdering Barbara and attempting to murder Denise, he was not convicted of the rest of the crimes that the weepy-voiced killer was believed to be responsible for. In 1997, Paul received a diagnosis of terminal skin cancer. Knowing that he would likely not survive for more than a year, he decided that he would reveal the true extent of his crimes and confessed to killing Kimberly Compton in 1981, Barbara Simmons in 1982, and a woman named Kathleen Greening in 1982. At this point, police had not linked the weepy-voiced killer to Kathy's death. In fact, there had been nothing to suggest a link between the cases. Kathy had been drowned in her own bathtub instead of being beaten or stabbed, and no remorseful phone calls had come through to 911 after her body was discovered. In total, Paul confessed to a near-fatal beating, 3 stabbings, and 1 drowning. In a statement to the media, he said, quote, "Since I've been locked down for the last 15 years, I've wondered how all this could happen, and all I can say is, I'm sick, and I'm sorry, if sorry means anything after 15 years. 1 year after confessing to his additional crimes, the weepy-voiced killer died in prison.
Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry what I did to Compton. I couldn't help it. Don't know why I had to stab her. I am so upset about it. I keep getting drunk every night. I can't believe it. It's just like a big dream. I can't think of being locked up. If I get locked up, I'll kill myself. I'd rather kill myself than get locked up. I'll try not to kill anybody else.
Fire emergency.
Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one. Oh, my safe. I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm sick. I'm going to kill myself, I think.
Where are you?
If somebody dies with a red shirt on, it's me. I killed both of them. I'll never make it to heaven.
Calm down.
Finally, I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody. Yes, please. This is an emergency. Please send a squad to Pierce Butler Road, Molenberg Manufacturing Company, machine shop. Please, there's an ambulance too. There's a girl hurt there.
Can you tell me what happened to her?
Just hurry. She's laying on the ground in the back by the railroad tracks, by the edge here. Hurry.
What's the address?
I don't know.
That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to subscribe. If you're listening right now and you have not subscribed to 10-Minute Murder, it only takes just a moment. In the time that I said that, you could have already subscribed. And if you didn't, let me give you a chance. Okay, you should be subscribed now. Cool. I appreciate it. For all things related to the podcast, you can go to 10minutemurder.com. And coming up on the next episode of the podcast, it's a chilling, twisted case of betrayal and teenage quarrels gone too far. It's a story about Skylar Neese, and it highlights the importance of knowing who is in our children's lives and how, even though they may look angelic-faced, they could be stone-cold killers. And I know that sounds a little bit dramatic, and hopefully not our kids, right? But in the story you're going to hear coming up after this one, it definitely is that situation. A quick listener email before we go. Hey Joe, Tam from Zimbabwe here. I listened to your podcast on Deezer. I was a tad late to find it. Only stumbled upon it last November, but I listened to at least 10 episodes a day while at work. It's the perfect podcast for short and sweet and entertaining, and you remind me a lot of myself when you're talking about certain things. The Diet Coke can being changed did it for me. Like I said, I found you recently, and I've been going through all the episodes, so I'm a little delayed to the Diet Coke can change. But thank you for making my days a little more bearable. I appreciate the hard work you put in. Stay blessed, Tam. And first of all, thank you so much, Tam from Zimbabwe, for taking the time to send the email. And in case you don't know what in the world Tam is talking about with his Diet Coke can, well, when Diet Coke, well, not Diet Coke, it was Coke Zero. When they switched from that black can to the red can, I was a little skeptical about it. I didn't want to switch with them. And apparently the recipe wasn't supposed to change, but I think it may be psychosomatic because it did definitely taste different to me. Not bad, but it just tasted different. And I was in my own silent protest, which I not so silently mentioned on this podcast. I switched to Diet Pepsi. And that's exactly what I'm drinking right at this current moment is Diet Pepsi, which other people absolutely hate. And I don't know why, because it tastes fine. However, I have been mixing in a lot of water now. I drink way less soda than I used to because, first of all, it's not healthy to drink as much soda as I was drinking, and because the onslaught of messages and emails from people saying, hey, you need to knock off that soda altogether. So I didn't do that, but I'm trying. Anyway, that's the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening to another 10-Minute Murder podcast episode. I will see you on the next one.